What's going on? This is King Cam Ujumbe podcast and Ujumbe Meets Message. And today's message is a book review. It's entitled Under Their Own Vine and Fig Tree by William E. Montgomery. The book deals with the African American church in the South between the years of 1865 and 1900. William E. Montgomery, who first published this work in 1993 by the Louisiana State University Press, was an instructor of history in Austin at the Austin Community College in Austin, Texas. He was a Fulbright professor in the University of Lesotho between the years of 1989 and 1990. The title, Under Their Own Vine and Fig Tree, derived from the biblical text, Micah, the Old Testament text, Micah chapter 4, verses 4. But they shall sit, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. For the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. Now, in this work, it displays the growth and development of the African American church in the antebellum South. The reader purchased this hardback through Amazon.com, and it consists of 358 pages with a table of contents, illustrations, epilogue, and index. The book covers 7 chapters and deals with the superficial as well as subconscious activities and thoughts of the African Americans as well as the church during this time frame. Keep in mind, this is right after the Civil War during the Reconstruction period. In the review, I will give a brief analysis of the book. And according to Montgomery, the story does not start in the South, but in West Africa. We'll talk about that. Montgomery also points out the religious similarities between Christianity and West African tradition. I will briefly discuss the impact of this event and how it touched the Black community in the North and in the South. Now, according to the author, a lot of Africans in America were influenced by white theologians during this time, and some Black. They were, in the ones in the North, the northern parts were more reserved and had a very conservative view to worship. According to Montgomery, most of whom is part of the Methodist Lutheran faith because of its structure and style. In some areas of segregation in the North, still the norm, and the freedmen, those who were free, had to worship in balconies and even outside. This would eventually cause tension between Blacks and whites. So later on, people like Amos Hall and Richard Allen would branch off and find and establish the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Conversely, the AME is still most prominent in the northern regions of the United States. Now, the southern states, however, which spanned from the docks of Virginia to Galveston, Texas, was in direct contact with Africans that came from the slave ships, so their worship experience would be very different. Now, of course, most of the enslaved could not worship the way they felt to do so, but through their own customs and traditions. You had the Yoruba, you had the people of the Congo, you had the people of Togo, so they couldn't worship the way that they wanted to. So for a while, they had to worship in the way that their masters, in the style that their masters worshiped. This over time was not acceptable to the Africans in the South. So they would go out into the woods and establish a praise house. Praise house was only one room. It was a one-room house in which the Africans would go to worship God in their own way. This was during the time when the West African culture and customs and nuances would come out. A lot of the rhythmic dances, chants, and songs and claps that was once an African part of African folklore and folk heritage was then converted into Baptist hymns. From the missionary standpoint, according to Montgomery, it was made by the missionaries, those who went throughout the South. They made contributions to the theologians of the North, both Black and white. So you had missionaries, black and white, going to the South, trying to corral this behavior. However, the result varied depending on the minister's um, ethnicity, background, and church denomination. Most Africans in the South prefer their own to preach the gospel to them. However, the resources were scarce, and most of the time, white preachers would come. They would go from plantation to plantation. Some giving giving the right message and encouragement and hope, while others would give sermons such as "Slaves, be obedient to your master." They being the more conservative type, did not understand the emotion and jubilations of the Africans whose roots were that of Africa. They would then mock the black preachers for shunning them as to think that they lacked the knowledge and understanding of the Holy Writ, the Holy Book. Now, as mentioned before, the results varied. Some slave states were more receptive to the Methodist doctrine, while others received the Baptist with vigor. And even more still, there are those who held fast to the Pentecostal experience. Now, the Baptists in the South, according to Montgomery, was popular because of the West African belief of water immersion in order to cleanse all unrighteousness. Water was a focal point and a conduit between the spirit and the spirit realm and the physical. Even the preacher, the demographics would change according to the region in which the word was taught. According to Thomas Fortune, he stated his thoughts and feelings of the African American preacher in that era. He said, no class of men wield more influence, for good or evil, among the Afro-Americans than the Afro-American preachers. Even though most of the preachers experienced the same hardships, the same struggles, and had the same amount of education, they were still esteemed a little higher than those of any other occupation, mainly because, again, the West African tradition gave room to the chief. They gave way to the chief and the spiritual advisor of the group. So the preacher naturally was the role of the spiritual advisor. But the role of that preacher was very hard on the plantation. If there was preaching on the plantation, most were illiterate as well as submissive to their masters. But however, it was their connection to God that gave them such status. And once slavery was over, local people still looked towards the preacher, the black preacher, to guide them into a new chapter of their lives. And now, when the war was over, and the people came out, the black people came out. And in my other podcast concerning the African American churches and its impact on education, as they was coming out to develop and express themselves freely through religion, they also wanted their children and their children's children to express themselves through education. So the development of the black church was very crucial during this period of time, during the Reconstruction period between 1865 and 1920. Moreover, if she did not develop, then the phenomena of this black culture would not be known to the world around us. And during this time, churches from various parts of the United States experienced different kinds of culture. Freedmen in the North wasn't as impacted as the free people during this time in the South. And so we saw a connection on one side with African roots, but then on the other, as people got more of a status and they got more prestige, they tried to shun that. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how this has rolled over into the 20th century, as far as how the African American church and how it either hindered spirit of the church or the spirit of the African in the church? Or did it hinder? Did it help it? Or did it hinder the African spirit in the church? We'll talk about that another day, but the book was pretty good. This book, Under Their Own Vine and Fig Tree, was very, very good and very motivating to read. This encouraged me to think about those who are unrecognized and forgotten. You see, we have great pillars in our community who are ministers, and we have the C.A.W. Clarks and the C.L. Franklins and Rosetta Tharps and Abraham Lincoln Kings and even Martin Luther King and many others, L.S. Cameron, Shreveport. But the development of the Black church was structured and developed by those who were, quote unquote, unknown, but their vision and their aspirations were felt. So it's very crucial. This was a crucial period of time between 1865 and 1920. And so if she didn't develop then, the phenomenon of the Black church would not be known today. Of course, the African Americans would still go to church, but the whole church culture would not be the same. This book is highly recommended to other historians as well as people who like to study. All right, this is King Cam Ujumbe podcast, and Ujumbe means message. And today's message was a book review, Under Their Own Vine and Fig Tree. Talk to you later. Don't forget to follow, subscribe.